Tonight, we dive into a mystery so deep it stretches across continents, cultures, and millennia. From the deserts of Mesopotamia to the mountains of South America, ancient stories tell of beings who came from the stars, shaping the very foundations of human civilization. But who were these star people? Were they gods, extraterrestrials, or something else entirely? The Anunnaki, those enigmatic deities of Sumerian legend, are often at the heart of these tales. But as we uncover the layers of history, we realize their influence may have been far more profound than we ever imagined. These celestial visitors didn't just teach humans how to build, they taught them how to rule, to love, and to survive. And yet, their true nature remains shrouded in mystery, hidden behind myths, symbols, and the silence of ancient texts. Join me as we journey through the echoes of time, uncovering how these legends of the Star People are more than just folklore. They may be the key to understanding who we are and where we came from. But be warned, the deeper we go, the more questions arise, and the more the truth slips further from our grasp. So, before we embark on this cosmic adventure, make sure to like the video and subscribe. For as long as humans have looked upward, the sky has never been empty. Across ancient cultures, the heavens were not distant or silent, but alive, with meaning, intention, and presence. Long before telescopes or modern science, people believed that knowledge, authority, and even life itself came from above. These beings were not always called gods, and they were not always worshipped in the same way. Some were teachers, some were judges, some were ancestors, and some crossed the boundary between sky and earth to change humanity forever. Today, many modern voices call them Star People, a shared label for figures described as coming from the heavens. But the idea itself is far older than the name. It is rooted in myth, ritual, and early attempts to explain the world using the sky as the highest source of truth. In ancient societies, the sky was order itself. The movement of the sun and stars controlled seasons, harvests, and survival. Because of this, anything associated with the heavens carried authority. When a culture said its laws came from the sky, that law became unquestionable. When a ruler claimed descent from a celestial being, their power felt natural and eternal. This pattern appears again and again across the world. In Mesopotamia, divine beings were said to descend from the heavens to shape humanity. In ancient Egypt, the pharaoh was tied to the sky through gods like Horus and Ra. In early China, the mandate of heaven decided who could rule. The Star People idea did not begin as fantasy, but as a way to explain why order existed at all. Many myths describe these sky beings as teachers who gave humans writing, farming, law, or astronomy. Others describe them testing humanity through floods, fire, or judgment. Some stories go further, describing unions between beings of the sky and humans, producing heroes or sacred bloodlines. These accounts were not meant as science or entertainment. They were frameworks for identity. They explained where people came from and why their customs mattered. When ancient texts speak of beings descending from the heavens, they are expressing a worldview where the sky was the ultimate source of legitimacy, not suggesting visitors from another planet. What matters most is not whether these beings physically existed, but why so many cultures described them in similar ways. The sky is the one place all humans share. It cannot be controlled, reached, or owned. By placing authority above the earth, societies created a source of truth beyond human argument. Over time, these ideas hardened into myth, religion, and tradition. In the modern age, when ancient stories are reread through the lens of technology, star people are often mistaken for something they were never meant to be. To understand them, we must first see them as reflections of how early humans understood power, knowledge, and their place beneath the vast and watchful sky. This shared sky-shaped memory, belief, and myth forming a foundation humanity carries whenever we look upward in wonder. The name Anunnaki sounds mysterious today, but in ancient Mesopotamia it was familiar and specific. The Anunnaki were not outsiders from the stars, but a defined group of deities within Sumerian and later Akkadian belief systems. Their name roughly means those of princely seed or offspring of Anu, with Anu being the sky god who stood at the top of the divine order. These beings appear in some of the earliest written texts known to humanity, dating to around the 3rd millennium before the Common Era. Clay tablets written in cuneiform describe a world governed by gods who represented natural forces, social order, and cosmic balance. The Anunnaki were part of this structure, not above it. In the earliest Sumerian sources, the Anunnaki are mentioned as a collective, rather than as individual characters. They appear in hymns, prayers, and administrative religious texts associated with temples and rituals. Their role was not to create humanity through advanced methods, but to oversee fate, justice, and divine authority. Over time, as Sumerian culture blended into Akkadian, Babylonian, and Assyrian traditions, the description of the Anunnaki shifted. Some texts place them as judges of the dead, while others describe them as powerful gods who descend to the earth to establish order. These changes reflect evolving religious ideas rather than hidden history. Ancient scribes were not recording eyewitness accounts, but preserving symbolic meaning tied to law, kingship, and morality. It is important to understand how ancient people wrote about their gods. Mesopotamian texts were not literal in the modern sense. When they described gods coming down from the sky, they were expressing divine approval and cosmic alignment. Kings claimed authority by stating the Anunnaki supported their rule, because power without divine backing was meaningless in that world. The Anunnaki also appear in famous texts like the Epic of Gilgamesh and later creation stories, where they participate in councils and decisions. None of these sources describe metal ships, distant planets, or advanced technology. Those ideas appear only in modern reinterpretations centuries later. Modern confusion often begins when ancient words are stripped from their cultural context. The Anunnaki lived in a universe where the sky was sacred and unseen forces ruled daily life. Calling them star people today reflects our own technological imagination, not the intent of the original writers. To the Sumerians, the heavens were not space, but order itself. The Anunnaki were expressions of that order given form through language, ritual, and belief. Understanding them requires reading the texts as ancient people intended, not as puzzles, hiding secret visitors, but as windows into how the first civilizations understood power, justice, and the sky above them. This distinction matters because Mesopotamia left thousands of tablets across centuries, allowing historians to track belief changes clearly. The Anunnaki belong to religion, mythology, and governance, not science fiction. When read carefully, these texts show humans searching for meaning, not recording encounters. The deeper question is why modern readers feel compelled to turn ancient gods into something else entirely today. As Mesopotamian civilization developed, the role of the Anunnaki did not remain frozen in time. Instead, their identity shifted alongside changes in politics, religion, and how people understood life and death. In earlier Sumerian thought, the Anunnaki were associated with the heavens through their connection to Anu, the sky god. But as centuries passed and cultures merged, especially during Akkadian and Babylonian periods, their function moved downward. Later texts increasingly place the Anunnaki not in the open sky, but within the underworld, acting as judges and enforcers of cosmic law. This transition is not evidence of hidden events, but proof that mythology evolves as societies change. One of the clearest examples appears in texts dealing with the afterlife. In Mesopotamian belief, death was not a gateway to reward, but a descent into a shadowed realm where all humans shared the same fate. The underworld needed order just as the living world did. In these writings, the Anunnaki appear as figures who decide destinies and maintain balance below the earth. They are sometimes described as seated in judgment, determining outcomes not through emotion, but through fixed cosmic rules. This reflects how Mesopotamians viewed justice itself as something unchanging and divine. This shift also mirrors changes in political structure. As city-states became empires, law codes replaced personal rule. Kings like Hammurabi claimed their authority came from divine law rather than personal strength. In this environment, gods became lawmakers and judges. The Anunnaki fit naturally into this role. They were no longer distant sky beings, but active forces, ensuring order extended beyond life itself. Their placement in the underworld made them symbols of final judgment, not creators or teachers. Importantly, these changes are documented across multiple centuries of tablets. Scholars can trace how names, roles, and attributes are reassigned over time. This shows that ancient scribes weren't hiding secrets, but openly adapting beliefs to match their world. If the Anunnaki were literal beings with a fixed origin, their description would remain consistent. Instead, they transform as myth transforms. Heaven and underworld were not physical locations, but symbolic realms. To move a god from one to the other was to redefine their meaning. Modern readers often see this shift as contradictory, but ancient people did not. To them, the cosmos was layered. Sky, earth, and underworld were interconnected parts of one system. A god could belong to more than one realm, because their role mattered more than their location. When the Anunnaki became judges of the underworld, it reflected a growing concern with accountability and order beyond death. Understanding this evolution helps separate ancient belief from modern imagination. The Anunnaki were never described as visitors who arrived and left. They were ideas shaped by time, culture, and human need. Their journey from heaven to underworld is not a mystery to solve, but a record of how humanity reshaped the divine to make sense of an increasingly complex world. When people search for the origins of the Anunnaki, they often turn to Mesopotamian creation stories, especially the Babylonian epic, known today as the Enuma Elish. This text was written down around the 2nd millennium before the Common Era and recited during religious festivals to explain how order emerged from chaos. It does not describe spaceships or advanced beings arriving from distant worlds. Instead, it presents a symbolic universe where gods represent forces of nature and political authority. The Anunnaki appear within this framework as members of a divine hierarchy, not as creators acting alone, but as participants in a structured cosmic system shaped by power struggle and balance. In the Enuma Elish, creation begins with primordial waters personified as divine beings. From this chaos, younger gods emerge, leading to conflict and eventual reorganization of the universe. The Anunnaki are mentioned as a group associated with authority and judgment, often contrasted with the Igigi, another class of gods. This division reflects social structure more than literal genealogy. Just as human societies had workers, rulers, and judges, the divine world mirrored that order. When the Anunnaki gather in councils, they function like a royal court, debating decisions that affect gods and humans alike. This imagery would have been familiar to an audience living under kings and law codes. One of the most misunderstood elements is the creation of humanity. In these myths, humans are formed to relieve the gods of labor, not through technology, but through divine will and ritual sacrifice. The Anunnaki approve or oversee these acts, reinforcing their role as authorities rather than inventors. The language used is symbolic, describing blood clay and breath to express ideas of life duty and connection to the divine. Ancient listeners understood this as meaning humans existed to maintain temples and social order, not as evidence of genetic engineering or scientific experimentation. What these creation stories truly reveal is how Mesopotamians understood power. The sky god Anu sat at the top, followed by gods like Enlil and later Marduk, whose rise reflected Babylon's political dominance. The Anunnaki shift position depending on which city held power at the time the text was copied. This is why their role changes across centuries. Myth followed politics. When Babylon rose, its god became supreme, and other divine figures were redefined beneath him. This flexibility shows that these stories were living traditions, shaped by human history. Reading the creation epic carefully makes one thing clear. The Anunnaki belong to a symbolic universe designed to explain order, authority, and human obligation. They are not visitors from beyond, but reflections of how ancient people projected their world onto the cosmos. When modern readers remove these texts from their cultural setting, they create mysteries that were never there. The real story told by the creation epics is not about travel through space, but about how humans have always looked to the heavens to justify power, explain existence, and find meaning in a fragile world. When people compare legends of star people across cultures, the similarities can feel unsettling. Beings from the sky who bring knowledge, establish laws, punish wrongdoing, or shape humanity appear again and again in stories separated by oceans and thousands of years. But understanding this pattern requires care. Similar does not mean identical, and shared motifs do not automatically point to a single hidden source. Historians and anthropologists approach these legends by looking at structure and function rather than assuming a lost global event. The goal is to understand why human societies independently reached for the sky when explaining origins, authority, and meaning. One of the most common motifs is descent. Star people rarely stay in the heavens. They come down. In Mesopotamia, gods descend to establish kingship. In the Americas, sky ancestors descend to found clans. In Asia, heavenly figures descend to restore harmony. This does not imply travel from another world, but reflects how the sky was seen as higher truth. Another shared motif is instruction. These beings teach farming, writing, law, or ritual. Early societies depended on stable knowledge to survive, and placing that knowledge in the hands of celestial figures made it sacred and unquestionable. When rules came from the sky, no human could easily challenge them. A third pattern is testing and judgment. Many star people myths involve moral trials, floods, fires, or punishments. These stories often appear during periods of social stress or change. They serve as warnings and explanations, teaching communities how to behave to avoid disaster. The sky becomes the witness to human action, always watching, always judging. This idea emerges naturally in cultures that observe the heavens daily and depend on seasonal order for survival. Another shared element is transformation through contact. Some legends describe humans changed by interaction with sky beings through marriage ancestry or blessing. These stories explain why certain families, tribes, or rulers are different. Divine ancestry becomes a tool for identity and hierarchy. This pattern appears wherever leadership needs legitimacy beyond strength alone. By claiming a celestial origin, power becomes destiny rather than ambition. What matters is what these motifs do within each culture. They solve local problems. They explain local landscapes. They support local values. Collapsing them into one universal story ignores this context and erases cultural meaning. Ancient people were not recording history as modern science understands it. They were encoding values, memory, and order into stories shaped by their environment. When studied carefully, the star people pattern tells us less about the sky itself and more about humanity. The heavens are constant across the planet. Every culture sees the same stars, but interprets them through its own needs, fears, and hopes. Similar skies produce similar symbols without requiring shared contact. This framework allows comparison without distortion. It respects difference while acknowledging repetition. In doing so, it reveals something profound. Humans have always looked upward, not because someone came down, but because meaning has always felt like it must come from above. Across the ancient world, knowledge rarely comes from the ground up. It comes from above. Again and again, early traditions describe laws, rituals, and essential skills as gifts delivered by beings connected to the sky. This pattern appears so consistently that it reveals something deeper than myth. It shows how early societies understood authority itself. The sky was distant, untouchable, and constant. By linking wisdom to the heavens, communities gave their most important knowledge a source no human could challenge or replace. In Mesopotamia, law was said to descend from the gods. Kings ruled by divine mandate, claiming their legal codes were approved by heavenly powers. The famous law code associated with Hammurabi was presented not as personal invention, but as justice, granted by a god. This framing mattered. If law came from the sky, obedience was not submission to a ruler, but alignment with the universe itself. Similar ideas appear in ancient Egypt, where sacred knowledge of writing, architecture, and ritual was associated with gods like Thoth, a divine figure tied to order and the cosmos. In early China, authority was grounded in the mandate of heaven. Rulers governed only as long as heaven approved. Natural disasters were read as signs that this approval had been withdrawn. Knowledge of ritual astronomy and moral conduct was therefore sacred, because it maintained harmony between earth and sky. The teacher was not merely wise, but cosmically authorized. This pattern appears in South Asia as well, where sacred texts were believed to be heard, rather than written, received from a higher realm and passed down through memory and chant. Skills necessary for survival were also placed in the hands of sky teachers. Farming calendars were aligned with stars. Navigation relied on constellations. Ritual timing followed lunar and solar cycles. Because survival depended on understanding the sky, those who claimed to interpret it held power. Myths arose to explain this authority by turning early astronomers, priests, and lawmakers into figures taught directly by heavenly beings. Over time, these figures became God's ancestors, or star people. This does not mean ancient societies believed knowledge arrived suddenly from elsewhere. It means they understood learning as sacred. Attaching wisdom to the sky protected it from corruption. If rituals failed or laws were broken, blame fell on human weakness, not on the system itself. The sky remained perfect, even when people were not. This separation helped maintain social stability. The idea of sky teachers also helped explain cultural beginnings. When a society asked where its customs came from, the answer pointed upward. This avoided conflict between groups by placing origin beyond human rivalry. No tribe could claim ownership of truth if truth itself came from above. The heavens became a neutral authority shared by all. In modern times, this pattern is often misunderstood. Ancient language describing descent teaching and divine gifts is read as literal arrival. But within historical context, these descriptions are symbolic expressions of how humans relate to knowledge. The sky represents permanence and order in a world that constantly changes. By giving wisdom a celestial source, early societies ensured it would endure. The star people as teachers are not records of visitors, but reflections of a human instinct to protect what matters most. Law, ritual, and skill are fragile. They survive only when treated as sacred, and nothing was more sacred to early humanity than the sky that governed their days, nights, seasons, and fate. Across North America, indigenous traditions speak of origins that reach beyond the earth and into the sky. These accounts are often called stories of star people or sky nations, but within indigenous cultures, they are not myths in the modern sense. They are teachings. They explain where a people came from, how they should live, and how they relate to the land and each other. Long before European contact, many nations preserved these accounts through oral tradition, ceremony, and seasonal observation, grounding identity not in conquest, but in relationship with the cosmos. Among several plains and southwestern nations, ancestors are said to have descended from the stars or emerged under the guidance of sky beings. These descriptions are not claims of physical travel through space. They are expressions of belonging. To come from the sky means to come from order, from balance, from something older and greater than any single generation. In Lakota tradition, the star knowledge woven into ceremony and timing reinforces moral law. Among the Hopi, sky connections shape migration stories and responsibility to maintain harmony with the world. The sky is not distant. It is part of daily life. These traditions also function as ethical systems. Sky ancestors often watch human behavior, rewarding balance and punishing excess. This reinforces accountability without centralized authority. When rules come from the heavens, they apply to everyone equally. No individual can rewrite them for personal gain. This structure helped communities survive without written law codes or standing armies. The stars became memory keepers, marking seasons for planting, hunting, and ceremony. Importantly, indigenous sky traditions are tied to place. Constellations are mapped onto local landscapes. Mountains, rivers, and plains reflect patterns seen above. This creates a living map connecting sky and earth. Knowledge of the heavens was practical as well as sacred. It guided travel, predicted weather, and regulated food cycles. Those who understood the stars were teachers and elders, not outsiders. Their authority came from observation passed down across generations. Modern interpretations often strip these stories of context. When star people accounts are isolated from indigenous worldview, they are turned into mysteries rather than teachings. This ignores how oral cultures encode information. Symbolic language preserves layered meaning. A sky ancestor can represent lineage, responsibility, and time all at once. Treating such language as literal misses its purpose. Historical records from early anthropologists show that these traditions were already ancient when first written down. They did not appear suddenly. They evolved alongside the people themselves. The continuity of these stories across centuries demonstrates cultural resilience, not hidden contact. Each nation's account is unique, shaped by environment and experience. The Sky Nations concept shows how identity can extend beyond land without losing connection to it. By locating origin in the heavens, indigenous cultures framed humanity as part of a larger system rather than its ruler. This perspective encourages humility. The sky does not belong to anyone. It watches all equally. These traditions remain alive today. They are not relics, but foundations. When indigenous peoples speak of star people, they are speaking of memory, responsibility, and belonging. The stars are not visitors. They are relatives in a universe where everything is connected and nothing stands alone. Across cultures and centuries, humans have consistently imagined ways for the sky and earth to connect. Motifs such as ladders, mountains, sacred trees, and stairways appear repeatedly in myths and ritual practices, symbolizing the pathway between the mortal world and the realm of the gods or celestial beings. These motifs are not evidence of physical contact from space. They are visual metaphors expressing how humans conceptualized authority, knowledge, and the divine. A ladder reaching the heavens, or a tree with roots in the earth and branches in the sky, demonstrates the link between the ordinary and the sacred. In Mesopotamia, ziggurats served as both temples and symbolic bridges. These stepped structures allowed priests to ascend closer to the sky, performing rituals believed to communicate with the gods above. The steps themselves represented the passage from human to divine. In Egypt, sacred mountains and obelisks functioned similarly, marking the landscape as a place where earthly and celestial realms could interact. The alignment of these structures with stars or solstices reinforced the idea that the heavens provided order and guidance. Sacred trees also appear in numerous traditions worldwide. The Norse Yggdrasil connects the underworld, earth, and heavens. In Mesoamerica, saber trees hold a comparable function, linking the underworld, human domain, and sky. These trees are never literal vessels for transportation. They encode social, spiritual, and cosmological meaning. The concept emphasizes verticality as a symbol of hierarchy and connection, showing that access to knowledge and authority comes from understanding one's position in the greater order. Ladders and stairways appear in myths across the Americas, Asia, and Oceania. In Andean culture, certain sacred sites were thought to allow communication with ancestors or sky beings. In Japan and China, stairways in temple complexes symbolize spiritual ascent, a preparation for ritual engagement with celestial forces. The repetition of these motifs does not imply shared historical events, but reflects a universal human inclination to explain the inaccessible with visible symbols. These bridges also regulate morality and societal behavior. Climbing a sacred ladder or reaching the top of a holy mountain often requires adherence to ritual, ethical behavior, and respect for established order. The journey itself demonstrates that divine knowledge is earned and cannot be claimed casually. This mirrors why the sky is often a source of laws and teachings in myths. Humans observe its order, then structure their societies accordingly. It is important to understand that these symbols evolve over time. Early uses in architecture, ritual, and myth influence later storytelling and ceremonial practice. They remain meaningful because they encode principles of balance, authority, and cosmic alignment, rather than providing technical instructions or historical documentation. Recognizing this pattern allows scholars to compare traditions without conflating separate cultures into one narrative. Bridges between sky and earth are ultimately metaphors for human aspiration. They demonstrate a desire to reach beyond immediate perception while respecting order and hierarchy. They encode wisdom, ethics, and social norms into visual and narrative forms. From ziggurats to sacred trees, these motifs remind us that in every culture the heavens were never distant abstractions. They were active participants in shaping how people lived, thought, and understood the world around them. In Mesoamerica, the sky was never distant. It was a living map, a clock, and a source of authority. Civilizations like the Maya and the Aztec built their calendars, rituals, and even political systems around celestial patterns. The sun, moon, Venus, and the stars were not merely objects to observe. They were signals, markers of time, and proof that rulers held power with cosmic approval. Temple pyramids were aligned to solstices and equinoxes, showing that the heavens dictated the rhythm of society. This integration of sky and governance made celestial knowledge central to legitimacy. The Maya, for example, developed the long count calendar, the Tzolk'in, and the Harb calendar, precise systems that tracked cycles of days, months, and years with extraordinary accuracy. These calendars were tied to agricultural cycles, ritual events, and political ceremonies. Priests and astronomer priests were highly trained, able to predict eclipses and the movements of Venus decades in advance. Their authority came from their mastery of this knowledge, interpreted as divine insight rather than human skill alone. The gods themselves were said to inhabit or control celestial bodies, linking rulers to divine favor. In Aztec culture, Huitzilopochtli, the sun god, and Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, were central to understanding the flow of time and legitimacy of leadership. Kings performed ceremonies timed with celestial events, demonstrating alignment with divine order. Temples and public spaces were carefully designed to mark the rising and setting of stars during significant dates, reinforcing that earthly power was reflected in the heavens. The public could see that order existed, that rulers acted in harmony with cosmic forces. These systems were not symbolic for entertainment. They were practical. Agriculture, warfare, and ritual depended on understanding cycles in the sky. Failing to align with celestial events could mean crop failure or ritual disaster. Civilizations measured authority in part by how accurately they observed and acted upon heavenly patterns. Knowledge of the stars was a matter of survival and political legitimacy. Mesoamerican texts, codices, and inscriptions describe the sky as a layered order. The heavens were divided into multiple levels, each inhabited by gods or spirits who influenced human life. The movements of Venus, in particular, were linked to timing wars and alliances, showing how celestial knowledge was embedded in strategy. Rulers who could interpret these patterns were seen as chosen, as conduits of divine will. Understanding Mesoamerican celestial order shows why myths about star people exist in this region. The gods of the sky were not distant observers, but active participants shaping human behavior, morality, and success. The pattern of descent, instruction, and judgment appears again, connecting myth with practical governance. By tracking the sky, societies maintained order, legitimized authority, and reinforced ethical behavior. In all, Mesoamerican civilizations demonstrate a deep integration of astronomy and social structure. Their myths, rituals, and governance are inseparable from the celestial order. Knowledge of the heavens was not optional. It was essential to life and leadership. The sky was authority. The star people were metaphors for that authority, reminding every citizen that order above guided life below, and that power without alignment to cosmic cycles was illegitimate. In the Andes, the sun was more than a celestial body. It was the source of life, authority, and social order. From the earliest cultures in the region, including the Inca civilization of the 15th and 16th centuries, rulers claimed descent from Inti, the sun god. This divine ancestry was not metaphorical. It was central to governance, law, and ritual. The Sapa Inca, the emperor, was considered the literal child of the sun, giving his words and decisions unquestioned legitimacy. Social hierarchies were structured around this principle, linking the natural order above with human society below. In Inca practice, solar worship was embedded in every aspect of life. Temples like Coricancha in Cusco were aligned precisely to solstices and equinoxes, allowing sunlight to illuminate sacred spaces in ceremonial moments. These architectural feats were not accidental, but designed to demonstrate the intimate connection between the ruler, the sun, and the people. Priests and astronomers advised the Sapa Inca, calculating important dates for planting, harvest, and festivals based on solar observation. Knowledge of the sun's movements became both a spiritual and administrative tool. The concept of divine ancestry served multiple purposes. It reinforced loyalty to the ruler, created a unified identity among diverse communities, and provided a cosmological explanation for why social structures existed. When the Inca expanded across the Andes, local leaders were incorporated into this system, acknowledging the Sapa Inca's sun-given authority. The legitimacy of rulership was inseparable from celestial alignment. Solar power justified political control, agricultural planning, and religious observance. Andean myths emphasize that the sun did not act alone. Moon, stars, and sacred mountains participated in maintaining cosmic balance. The Inca and preceding cultures understood that social harmony depended on observing these celestial patterns. Ceremonies such as Inti Raymi celebrated the sun's strength and reaffirmed the ruler's divine role. These events were not mere pageantry. They reinforced practical knowledge of time, seasons, and resource management while maintaining spiritual cohesion. Historical evidence from chronicles written by Spanish chroniclers in the 16th century and archaeological studies of temples and observatories confirm these connections. Observatories at sites like Machu Picchu and Pisac demonstrate precise alignments with solar and stellar events, showing that astronomy guided both ritual and administration. The sun as authority was a tangible, measurable concept, not symbolic only in legend. Understanding Andean traditions highlights a pattern seen elsewhere. Societies consistently link celestial authority with governance and ethics. Just as Mesopotamian kings claimed backing from the Anunnaki, and Mesoamerican rulers timed events with Venus, The Inca traced power to Inti. Sky and earth were integrated, and knowledge of the heavens reinforced moral, social, and political order. Divine ancestry legitimized leadership, structured society, and preserved cultural continuity across generations. Or in the Andes, the children of the sun weren't myths to entertain. They were the embodiment of a system connecting cosmic order with human life. Every festival, temple, and administrative decision reflected this principle, showing that authority and ethics were inseparable from the sky above. The sun was law, the ruler was law, and through them, society maintained balance between heaven and earth. Across the vast Pacific Ocean, Polynesian societies developed an extraordinary relationship with the sky that combined survival, identity, and spirituality. For navigators traveling between islands thousands of miles apart, the stars weren't distant lights, but a living map. Knowledge of constellations, their rising and setting, and their relation to wind and ocean currents allowed skilled navigators to cross enormous distances with astonishing accuracy. This expertise was practical, but it was also sacred. Each star and constellation carried genealogical and cosmological significance, linking people to ancestors and the broader universe. Polynesian navigators memorized star paths known as star lines, which marked precise routes between islands. These were taught orally, generation to generation, without written records. Each movement of the stars corresponded to the ocean, the seasons, and the timing of voyages. Knowledge of tides, swells, and cloud formations was combined with celestial observation to ensure safe travel. The accuracy of this system was confirmed by the successful settlement of islands from Hawaii in the sea, north to New Zealand in the south, and Easter Island in the east, centuries before European contact. Beyond navigation, the stars encoded ancestry and social order. Lineages were traced back to sky ancestors, connecting people to celestial origins. Chiefs and priests often claimed descent from stars or gods associated with the heavens, giving legitimacy to their authority. This practice reinforced communal cohesion and maintained cultural continuity, as the heavens were both reference and moral compass. Genealogies were recited alongside voyages, showing that survival depended as much on memory and ritual as on skill. Polynesian star knowledge also structured ceremonial life. Certain stars marked planting, fishing, and religious festivals. Observing these patterns ensured that human activity remained in harmony with seasonal and cosmic cycles. By aligning practical life with celestial rhythm, communities maintained both ecological balance and spiritual order. The sky became a living, interactive system in which humans participated through careful observation, ritual, and oral transmission. Historical accounts from early European explorers in the 16th and 17th centuries recorded the precision and consistency of Polynesian navigation. Observers noted that navigators could reach tiny islands hundreds of miles away without instruments, relying solely on the stars, wind, and waves. Archaeological evidence, such as the alignment of marae and other sacred sites, confirms the integration of celestial knowledge into social and religious structures. These systems were refined over centuries, showing an extraordinary level of empirical observation combined with cultural meaning. Understanding Polynesian traditions emphasizes a pattern seen worldwide. The sky is authority, law, and knowledge. In the Pacific, the heavens guided survival, social hierarchy, and spiritual practice simultaneously. Navigators weren't mythic visitors from another world. They were human beings who mastered the sky and imbued it with sacred significance. Their star knowledge represents a living, functional connection between humans and the cosmos. The Polynesian example reminds us that the sky can be both practical and symbolic. It is a tool for navigation, a record of ancestry, and a moral framework for society. Across generations, Polynesian peoples maintained these systems without written language, showing that knowledge and authority from the heavens can be preserved through careful observation, memory, and ritual. The living sky shaped not only where they went, but who they were. In Australia, the sky is more than a backdrop. For Aboriginal peoples, it is a living landscape, a source of law, memory, and morality. Across the continent, countless groups have stories linking ancestors and spirits to the stars, planets, and the Milky Way. These sky ancestors are not imagined visitors. They are cultural guides, shaping how communities understand their environment, social obligations, and history. Stories of the sky are tightly connected to land, reflecting a worldview where Earth and cosmos are inseparable. The Yolngu, Wardaman, and other groups teach that constellations represent ancestral beings who created landmarks, rivers, and sacred sites. As these beings moved across the land, they left laws embedded in the landscape. The sky mirrors the earth. When a star rises or sets, it signals time for planting, hunting, or ceremony. The sky records memory, telling the story of how people and the land came to be. Each story carries moral lessons, teaching cooperation, respect, and responsibility. Observing the heavens is observing law itself. Aboriginal narratives also use the sky to encode ethics. The emu in the sky, represented by dark patches in the Milky Way, warns of seasonal changes and social responsibilities. The movements of Orion and the Pleiades communicate timing for specific events, ensuring that human action remains in harmony with the natural world. Violating these patterns is considered a breach of law, not merely a mistake. The stars are not passive. They actively guide behavior and decision-making. Oral traditions preserve these teachings over millennia. Stories are passed down through song, ceremony, and visual symbols, ensuring that knowledge remains consistent despite the absence of written language. Observing the stars is intertwined with cultural identity. Aboriginal peoples maintain precise knowledge of star positions, eclipses, and planetary movements, demonstrating observational skill as well as spiritual understanding. This knowledge is deeply practical and sacred simultaneously. Historical accounts from European observers in the 18th and 19th centuries record these systems, but often misinterpret them as superstition. Modern scholarship, however, recognizes the sophistication of Aboriginal astronomy. Stone arrangements, ceremonial sites, and oral narratives confirm that celestial observation was a structured science embedded in daily life, law, and memory. The sky guides not only survival, but moral and cultural continuity. Understanding Aboriginal sky ancestors highlights a consistent pattern across human cultures. Authority, ethics, and knowledge are often projected onto the heavens. The stars are used to preserve memory, structure society, and encode morality. This framework ensures that culture and law persist over generations, anchoring communities to both land and sky. For Aboriginal Australians, the cosmos is inseparable from life on Earth. Sky ancestors are lawmakers, historians, and ethical teachers. They provide guidance, mark time, and embed memory in both landscape and celestial patterns. The heavens are a living record, a shared authority that shapes behavior, preserves identity, and ensures that each generation understands its place in the world. the sky is never distant. It is integral to law, memory, and morality. Across Africa, many cultures have traditions that link the sky to ancestry, morality, and knowledge. In regions ranging from West Africa to East Africa and the Nile Valley, celestial bodies are woven into creation stories, seasonal guidance, and social codes. The Dogon of Mali, for example, have detailed knowledge of the star Sirius, its companion star, and their movements, encoded in oral traditions and ritual practices. Similarly, Egyptian cosmology tied the stars to the cycles of the Nile, kingship, and the afterlife. These motifs illustrate a widespread human pattern of projecting authority and memory onto the heavens. African narratives often describe beings or ancestors descending from the sky to teach essential skills, establish law, or guide communities. These figures function symbolically, providing a framework for order rather than reporting literal visits from other worlds. In Yoruba cosmology, deities known as Orisha descend from the heavens to instruct and protect humanity. Their actions encode ethical behavior and reinforce societal hierarchy. In ancient Egypt, stars were connected to Ma'at, the principle of balance, law, and justice, showing that cosmic order was inseparable from social governance. It is important to approach these traditions carefully. Modern interpretations sometimes read these motifs as evidence of extraterrestrial contact, but historical and anthropological research indicates they were symbolic and culturally specific. Projecting contemporary ideas about space travel onto ancient African texts risks distorting their meaning. These stories were designed to explain human experience, maintain social cohesion, and preserve memory. They were practical, ethical, and spiritual tools, not technological manuals. Seasonal and agricultural cycles further demonstrate the practical use of sky knowledge. Farmers in the Sahel, the Ethiopian highlands, and along the Nile relied on the stars to predict rainfall and harvest times. Rituals timed with celestial events reinforced communal responsibility and survival strategies. Astronomy was inseparable from ethics and memory. Observing the heavens taught not only when to plant or harvest, but also how to act within a moral and social framework. Cautionary comparison is necessary, because similar sky motifs appear in many cultures worldwide. Beings descending from the heavens, celestial instruction, and divine judgment are repeated patterns. Not all similarities indicate a shared historical source or literal event. African narratives must be understood within their own cultural, historical, and ecological context. Misinterpreting these stories risks flattening rich and diverse traditions into a single global narrative that erases meaning and nuance. Historians and anthropologists emphasize the difference between motif and literal truth. Stars, ancestors, and sky beings serve as tools to transmit law, ethics, and memory across generations. African sky traditions show how communities integrate observation, spirituality, and governance into a coherent worldview. The sky is authority, memory, and moral guide, not a physical vehicle for extraterrestrial visitors. By studying Africa's star narratives responsibly, we see a sophisticated system of knowledge. Ethical behavior, social order, and survival are encoded in stories about the heavens. These accounts demonstrate that humans have always looked upward for guidance, for law, and for understanding of their place in the world. Modern reinterpretation must respect that context, distinguishing symbolic instruction from imaginative projection. African sky narratives are practical, sacred, and deeply meaningful, reflecting centuries of observation, experience, and cultural continuity. The Dogon people of Mali are often cited in modern discussions about star people because of their knowledge of the star Sirius. Popular accounts claim that the Dogon knew about Sirius B, a white dwarf companion to Sirius, long before it was observed by Western astronomers in the 19th century. This story has fueled speculation that they had contact with extraterrestrial beings or possessed lost ancient knowledge. However, careful examination of historical sources shows a more nuanced reality. Anthropologists who studied the Dogon in the 20th century found that some claims were shaped by how outsiders reported and interpreted their observations. Ethnographers Marcel Griol and Germaine Dieterlen conducted fieldwork among the Dogon, starting in 1931 and continuing into the 1960s. They documented a rich cosmology that included Sirius, Saturn, and other celestial phenomena. Griol's publications suggested detailed knowledge of Sirius B, but the accuracy and interpretation of these claims have been debated. Critics argue that some information may have been miscommunicated, misunderstood, or even influenced by the presence of researchers who had prior knowledge of modern astronomy. This raises questions about what was genuinely part of Dogon tradition versus what may have been shaped by external contact. It is also important to consider the context of Dogon astronomy within African oral traditions. Their cosmology is symbolic and ritualistic, encoding ethical, social, and ecological lessons. Stories about stars are often linked to creation myths, moral teachings, and ceremonial practices. Descriptions of Sirius and its companions may function as metaphors for cycles, duality, and balance, rather than literal observation of a distant white dwarf. Oral knowledge is flexible, context-dependent, and integrated into broader cultural meaning. Reading it purely as a scientific claim risks ignoring these layers. Further scrutiny shows that European explorers and researchers may have inadvertently reinforced the idea of advanced astronomical knowledge. Interviews with Dogon elders could have been influenced by curiosity about Western science or by translation challenges. Anthropological methods in the mid-20th century were less critical of observer effects than today, leading to claims that were repeated widely in popular literature. Modern astronomy confirms the existence of Sirius B, but there is no independent evidence that the Dogon observed it without instruments. The Dogon case illustrates the complexity of interpreting sky knowledge. It highlights how modern fascination with ancient wisdom can amplify claims beyond what is historically verifiable. Scholars emphasize separating cultural meaning from scientific assertion. The Dogon stories are valuable for understanding African cosmology, social order, and ritual practice, regardless of whether they include precise observations of distant stars. By studying what is known alongside what is claimed, we see that the Dogon represent a sophisticated engagement with the sky, ethics, and memory. Their traditions connect generations, teach moral and social principles, and guide ceremonial life. The popular narrative of secret knowledge may capture imagination, but careful research reminds us that context, interpretation, and modern reporting profoundly shape how these stories are received. The Dogon reveal that sky knowledge is as much about human understanding as it is about celestial observation. Across cultures, one of the most consistent roles attributed to sky beings is that of teacher. Anthropologists have observed that whether in Mesopotamia, Mesoamerica, the Andes, Polynesia, or Australia, Divine or celestial figures are credited with instructing humans in law, ritual, and essential skills. These teachings are not incidental. They serve a critical function in legitimizing human authority. When knowledge comes from above, it is beyond dispute. A king, priest, or community elder can claim that their right to govern, enforce rules, or conduct ceremonies is sanctioned by forces that no one can challenge. In Mesopotamia, the Anunnaki were described as giving laws and rituals to humans under the guidance of higher gods. These accounts are symbolic of how early civilizations understood authority. Human rulers were expected to uphold what had been divinely transmitted. In the Americas, Mesoamerican deities instructed rulers and communities on calendars, ceremonies, and agricultural cycles. Knowledge from the sky reinforced social hierarchy and connected the fate of humans to cosmic order. Timing festivals and planting crops according to celestial events demonstrated both competence and alignment with higher principles. In the Andes, the Sapa Inca claimed descent from Inti, the sun god, and inherited knowledge necessary for governance and ritual practice. Solar authority legitimized rule and reinforced social cohesion. By teaching through the persona of divine ancestry, rulers were able to unify diverse communities under a shared understanding of law, morality, and seasonal responsibility. These instructions were encoded in architecture, ceremonial observances, and oral traditions, ensuring that knowledge survived over centuries. Polynesian navigators provide a practical example. Star knowledge was literally life-saving, guiding travel across thousands of miles of ocean. These navigational skills were taught as sacred inheritance. Learning from the heavens conveyed legitimacy, as only those who could demonstrate mastery were trusted to lead voyages or advise the community. The stars themselves became authority figures, validating human action. Similarly, Aboriginal Australians relied on sky ancestors to teach law, morality, and memory. Ethical behavior and social responsibility were embedded in these narratives, showing that instruction from above was not merely theoretical, but operational. Anthropologists suggest that attributing knowledge to the sky accomplishes several goals. It protects the information from being contested, preserves social stability, and frames human action within a cosmic order. Sky teachers are not imagined as invaders or extraterrestrials. They are symbolic embodiments of principles that societies wish to convey. By positioning instruction as coming from a higher realm, cultures ensure that critical knowledge remains honored and followed. This pattern repeats worldwide because it addresses a universal need. Authority requires justification. Knowledge, law, and ritual gain power when tied to something larger than human whim. The sky becomes a witness, a guarantor, and a teacher. Societies with celestial instruction are able to align survival, ethics, and governance simultaneously, demonstrating that the heavens are not distant abstractions, but integral to human order. Understanding why sky beings teach humans reveals that myths of descent and instruction are deeply practical. They ensure continuity of law, morality, and social structure. Across continents and millennia, humans have looked upward, not only for guidance, but for validation of their own authority. The heavens legitimize the rules by which people live and maintain harmony between the world below and the cosmos above. Across human history, one of the most persistent motifs is the union of celestial beings with humans. From Mesopotamia to Mesoamerica, the Andes, Polynesia, and beyond, myths describe gods marrying or producing children with humans. These stories are not evidence of literal encounters with beings from other worlds. They are symbolic expressions of authority, legitimacy, and the integration of cosmic order into human life. When a human descends from, or is connected to a god, their social status, leadership, or moral authority is framed as divinely sanctioned. In Mesopotamian texts, certain kings and heroes are described as offspring of gods or as chosen by celestial figures. These connections reinforce the ruler's right to govern, ensuring that laws and rituals have divine backing. The Anunnaki, for example, interact with humanity in ways that establish societal norms, and marriages or unions serve to legitimize important lineages. This motif is not rare, but deeply embedded in the political and religious imagination of the time. In Mesoamerica, rulers were often seen as linked to deities through bloodlines or ritual enactment. The Maya, for instance, claimed descent from gods associated with the sun and maize, connecting agricultural prosperity to divine favor. Aztec emperors were considered intermediaries between gods and humans, and their union with the divine was reflected in both ceremonial life and social hierarchy. Marriage to a celestial figure symbolized the integration of heavenly authority into earthly governance. In the Andes, the Sapa Inca's divine ancestry as a child of Inti. The sun god legitimized rule across a diverse empire. Rituals and festivals reenacted these unions symbolically, reminding the population that social order was not arbitrary, but divinely guided. Lineage and inheritance were framed within this celestial human connection, reinforcing obedience, ethical behavior, and continuity of governance. Polynesian and Australian traditions also reflect these patterns. Polynesian myths describe unions between sky ancestors and humans to explain lineage and inheritance, embedding identity and moral obligation within cosmology. Aboriginal Australian stories often describe ancestors descending from the sky to marry or instruct humans, encoding law, ethics, and memory in the process. These narratives function as educational tools, ensuring that social and environmental knowledge is passed across generations with divine authority attached. Anthropologists emphasize that the motif of gods marrying humans is a symbolic tool for legitimizing social structures. It ensures that critical knowledge, ethical systems, and political authority are seen as part of a cosmic order. Descendants of such unions carry authority, ensuring that their decisions, leadership, and teachings are obeyed because they are viewed as sanctioned by the heavens. The motif links morality, governance, and identity in a single framework. Understanding these narratives shows that humans have long looked to the sky to justify power, preserve memory, and enforce ethical behavior. Celestial unions are not literal history, but symbolic architecture for authority. They provide a way to encode law, ritual, and leadership in stories that resonate with communities over centuries. When gods marry humans, it is the human world that is transformed, grounded, and ordered according to the principles of the cosmos. Across the ancient world, stories of floods, divine judgment, and cosmic resets appear repeatedly. Mesopotamian traditions, such as the Epic of Gilgamesh, describe a great flood sent by the gods to punish humanity, while the biblical account in Genesis presents Noah as chosen to survive and preserve life. In each case, the flood functions as a cosmic reset, a moment when divine authority intervenes to reorder the world. The emphasis is not on water alone, but on judgment, moral accountability, and the reinforcement of societal norms through divine sanction. In Sumerian and Akkadian texts, the flood occurs after a council of gods decides that humanity has become too noisy or disobedient. The Anunnaki debate the fate of humans, demonstrating that divine governance operates collectively. Utnapishtim, the hero, is instructed to build a vessel to preserve life, showing that survival depends on compliance with divine instruction. This pattern links human behavior to cosmic order, emphasizing that ethical and societal norms are enforced by forces beyond the ordinary. The biblical narrative echoes similar motifs. Noah receives instructions from God to build an ark and preserve species, illustrating the intertwining of morality, divine authority, and human survival. The flood serves as both punishment and opportunity for renewal. After the waters recede, humanity begins again, with laws and covenants established to guide proper behavior. The flood story functions as a teaching tool, warning communities of the consequences of disorder and the importance of observing divine law. Other cultures also contain reset myths tied to judgment. Hindu texts like the Matsya Purana describe a great deluge in which the fish incarnation of Vishnu instructs humanity to preserve life and knowledge. In Mesoamerica, myths recount cosmic catastrophes that reorder the world, often involving celestial observation and ritual alignment. Across these narratives, divine councils or representatives act as judges, making decisions that enforce moral and social frameworks. The motif connects human action to the cosmos, showing that balance and order are maintained by authority that transcends ordinary perception. Anthropologists note that these stories encode practical and ethical lessons. They preserve memory of natural disasters, teach moral responsibility, and legitimize leadership. The inclusion of divine councils demonstrates that authority is not arbitrary, but deliberated and justified by higher powers. Humans are expected to observe rules and maintain order or face consequences. Floods, catastrophes, and cosmic resets become symbols of accountability rather than literal histories, though they may also reflect environmental knowledge of rivers, storms, and seasonal cycles. The pattern of cosmic reset stories reveals a universal human need to explain disorder and re-establish balance. By attributing judgment to the heavens, societies create a moral framework that spans generations. These myths reinforce compliance with social and religious norms, teaching that human behavior affects survival and cosmic stability. Judgment is both corrective and educational, guiding communities to respect laws, maintain ethical behavior, and observe divine principles. Understanding flood and reset narratives highlights the integration of law, ethics, and cosmic authority. Divine councils, judges, and celestial intervention show that humans are accountable to a larger order. Across continents and cultures, these stories serve the same purpose: to link morality, social structure, and survival to the authority of the heavens. The flood is not merely a story of water. It is a demonstration that cosmic oversight enforces balance and continuity in the human world. Across cultures, certain natural and constructed locations are treated as sacred because they connect humans with the divine. Mountains, temples, and what are sometimes called sky doors or celestial gates appear repeatedly in myths and ritual practices. In Mesopotamia, ziggurats were not only temples but symbolic ladders to the heavens, demonstrating a vertical connection between humans and gods. In the Andes, peaks like Ausengard were considered living ancestors and points of spiritual ascent, integrating landscape with ritual authority. These places serve as focal points for memory, law, and social cohesion. In Mesoamerica, pyramids and temple complexes are aligned with solstices, equinoxes, and the movements of planets. Teotihuacan and Chichen Itza illustrate how architecture encodes cosmic observation, reinforcing the idea that sacred spaces are bridges between earthly life and celestial authority. Rituals performed at these sites mark time, validate leadership, and maintain social order. The structures themselves are carefully placed to correspond with celestial events, demonstrating that sacred geography is inseparable from cosmology. Aboriginal Australian traditions treat hills, rock formations, and waterholes as the footprints or dwellings of sky ancestors. These locations are not literal landing pads for extraterrestrial visitors, but encoded maps of law, morality, and memory. Storylines connect these physical spaces to ethics and survival strategies. The land is animated, and ceremonial observance ensures that communities remain aligned with both environmental and social order. The sacredness of the site ensures the continuity of cultural knowledge. Polynesian navigators also associate specific islands or mountain peaks with celestial guidance. High points act as visual markers in oral navigation systems, showing that sacred places are not just spiritual, but practical. They provide reference for human movement, resource management, and ritual observance. Mountains and elevated terrain appear in myths as places where sky ancestors imparted knowledge, creating both physical and symbolic centers of authority. In ancient Egypt, temples on high ground or aligned with stars reinforce divine kingship. Observatories and ritual spaces were integrated into urban planning to maintain cosmic order. The alignment of monuments with Sirius, Orion, and other stars emphasizes that the heaven's structure, not only ritual, but governance. Sacred places are thus nodes where authority, knowledge, and cosmology intersect. These patterns show that across the globe, humans treat elevated or specially designed locations as focal points for interaction with the divine. They are not merely places of worship, but centers for encoding memory, law, and ethics. Mountains, temples, and sky doors serve as metaphors for access to authority, cosmic order, and ancestral knowledge. The symbolism of ascent, elevation, or alignment demonstrates that sacred spaces connect humans to principles larger than themselves. Understanding sacred places as mythic focal points reveals the universal function of architecture and landscape in organizing human life. They guide behavior, encode knowledge, and legitimize leadership. Whether ziggurats, pyramids, peaks, or ceremonial grounds, these locations operate as cultural anchors, integrating the earth and sky, law and ritual, memory and morality. Sacred geography ensures continuity between humans and the cosmos, making certain places timeless centers of power and meaning. Across ancient civilizations, the stars were primarily a tool for observation and survival, rather than a secret code or message from otherworldly beings. Societies in Mesopotamia, Egypt, Mesoamerica, the Andes, Polynesia, and Australia developed sophisticated knowledge of the heavens to track time, seasons, and environmental cycles. This knowledge was practical, embedded in daily life, agriculture, and ritual. By observing the rising and setting of stars, people could predict floods, planting seasons, and migratory patterns, ensuring that survival and societal order were maintained. In Mesopotamia, scribes and priests observed the movements of planets and stars to establish calendars. The Sumerians developed one of the first known lunisolar calendars around 3200 BCE, linking celestial cycles to agriculture and civic events. Temples acted as observatories where priests could record the motion of stars and interpret seasonal changes. This astronomical knowledge was vital for timing, planting, harvesting, and religious festivals, showing that observation, not speculation, was the foundation of understanding. Egyptian civilization also demonstrates this principle. The heliacal rising of Sirius, known as Sopdet, marked the annual inundation of the Nile. This predictable celestial event allowed farmers to plan irrigation, planting, and resource allocation with remarkable accuracy. Temple alignments, pyramids, and obelisks often corresponded with solstices and specific star positions, ensuring that knowledge of the heavens was integrated into civic and religious life. Astronomy in Egypt was deeply practical, tied to survival and social cohesion. In Mesoamerica, the Maya tracked the movements of the sun, moon, Venus, and other planets. Their long-count calendar and Tzolk'in system recorded complex cycles that guided agriculture, ritual, and political activity. Priests could predict eclipses and planetary alignments, reinforcing the connection between celestial observation and human governance. These observations were not esoteric codes, but a reliable system for regulating society and sustaining life. Andean civilizations used similar methods, aligning sacred architecture and observatories with solstices and star positions. The Inca and their predecessors monitored the sun and stars to regulate agriculture, festival timing, and ceremonial practices. Polynesian navigators relied on the positions of stars for precise maritime travel, demonstrating that practical knowledge of the heavens could guide survival over thousands of miles. Aboriginal Australians observed constellations to mark seasonal changes, resource availability, and social rituals, linking ethics and memory to the rhythms of the sky. These examples emphasize that ancient astronomy was systematic, empirical, and tied to human needs. Observing patterns in the sky allowed societies to plan, survive, and organize complex cultural, agricultural, and political systems. The stars functioned as a universal calendar rather than a coded message from external beings. This knowledge was accessible, teachable, and preserved orally, architecturally, or through ritual, demonstrating continuity across generations. Understanding the stars as calendars highlights the intelligence, ingenuity, and adaptability of ancient peoples. Their observations shaped society, maintained ethical and social order, and ensured survival. Far from secret codes, the night sky was a record of time, a tool for planning, and a guide for living in harmony with the world. In the 20th century, a new interpretation of ancient myths emerged, reframing gods, sky beings, and celestial teachers as extraterrestrial visitors. Writers such as Erich von Däniken popularized the idea in the 1960s, with works like Chariots of the Gods, suggesting that ancient civilizations had been influenced or guided by beings from other planets. These interpretations reimagined Mesopotamian deities, Egyptian gods, and Mesoamerican rulers as recipients of advanced technology and knowledge from alien visitors rather than participants in symbolic, cultural, and religious systems. The appeal of this perspective was widespread, fueled by post-World War II interest in space, UFO sightings, and the space race. Von Däniken and others argued that ancient architecture, astronomical knowledge, and mythic stories could only be explained through extraterrestrial contact. Monuments like the pyramids of Giza, Stonehenge, and the Nazca Lines were interpreted as evidence of alien engineering or guidance. Myths of gods marrying humans, descending from the sky, or providing advanced knowledge, were read literally rather than symbolically. This approach often ignored the historical, archaeological, and ethnographic context in which these stories developed. Ancient texts were stripped of cultural meaning and reframed as technical manuals or eyewitness accounts of alien visitation. Critics have emphasized that these claims are largely speculative. Historians, archaeologists, and anthropologists point out that human ingenuity, observation, and social organization can explain the construction of monumental architecture, astronomical knowledge, and complex calendars. For example, the precise alignment of pyramids with celestial bodies can be understood through careful observation over generations. Mesoamerican and Andean astronomy demonstrates systematic calculation and empirical knowledge without requiring external intervention. Oral traditions, ritual practice, and cultural memory provide context for myths of gods and sky beings, revealing them as symbolic rather than literal accounts of extraterrestrial influence. The modern reinvention of ancient astronaut narratives often conflates separate cultural traditions, assuming that all references to sky beings or divine ancestry are part of a single global phenomenon. This homogenization ignores the specific historical, ecological, and social conditions of each culture. Egyptian cosmology, Sumerian texts, Andean solar worship, and Polynesian navigation evolved independently and for practical, spiritual, and social reasons. Treating these traditions as evidence of alien contact misrepresents their significance and diminishes the achievements of human civilizations. Despite criticism, the idea of ancient astronauts has permeated popular culture through television, film, and literature, influencing how people imagine the past. Myths and legends are often interpreted through the lens of modern curiosity about space and technology rather than historical understanding. The popularity of these theories demonstrates a human fascination with the sky and with external authority, reflecting contemporary desires for extraordinary explanations of ancient accomplishments. Understanding the modern reinterpretation shows the contrast between historical fact and speculative narrative. Ancient stories of gods, star beings, and sky teachers were deeply embedded in social, moral, and environmental systems. Reframing them as extraterrestrial contact is a 20th century invention, influenced by fascination with space, technological optimism, and a desire for alternative explanations. Recognizing this distinction is critical for appreciating both the ingenuity of ancient cultures and the ways modern imagination reshapes their legacy. In contemporary media, the Anunnaki have taken on a life of their own, often disconnected from historical scholarship. Once firmly situated in Sumerian, Akkadian, and Babylonian mythology as a group of deities involved in creation, law, and the underworld, they are now frequently depicted in books, television, films, and video games as ancient aliens, cosmic rulers, or secret manipulators of human history. These portrayals often bear little resemblance to the original texts and reinterpret the Anunnaki to fit modern storytelling, sensationalism, or entertainment. The transformation illustrates how mythic figures can be detached from their historical and cultural context over time. The popularization of the Anunnaki as extraterrestrial visitors accelerated in the late 20th century through the influence of authors like Zecharia Sitchin. In 1976, Sitchin published The 12th Planet, which proposed that the Anunnaki came from a hypothetical planet called Nibiru to mine gold and shape human civilization. These claims were widely publicized in alternative history circles and later became embedded in internet culture. Sitchin's interpretations, however, have been widely criticized by scholars for mistranslations and misrepresentations of Sumerian texts. Academic consensus maintains that the Anunnaki were deities with social, moral, and cosmic roles rather than literal extraterrestrial beings. Despite scholarly critique, the Anunnaki's modern reinvention continues to thrive. Television documentaries, science fiction series, and online forums often present them as shadow rulers or architects of human evolution. The mythos has expanded beyond Mesopotamia to influence narratives about ancient monuments, lost technologies, and secret knowledge. Writers, game designers, and filmmakers exploit the flexibility of the Anunnaki, using them as symbols of power, mystery, and cosmic intervention, while removing the historical and religious frameworks that originally defined them. This shift demonstrates a broader pattern in modern culture, where ancient deities become malleable symbols, rather than specific historical figures. In these portrayals, the Anunnaki are often associated with ideas of hidden knowledge, control, and human manipulation. They appear in contexts that emphasize drama, suspense, or speculative conspiracy rather than historical accuracy. As a result, the Anunnaki serve as a narrative tool that can be adapted to various genres, from science fiction to speculative history, reflecting contemporary fascination with authority, technology, and the unknown. While popular culture detaches the Anunnaki from their origins, understanding the original context is critical for historical literacy. In Mesopotamian texts, the Anunnaki were integral to religious, judicial, and creation narratives, forming part of a complex hierarchy of gods that shaped human society symbolically and morally. They were not beings from another planet, but entities embedded within the cosmology, social norms, and ethics of ancient civilizations. Recognizing this helps distinguish between modern invention and historical fact. The modern afterlife of the Anunnaki reveals the power of storytelling to transform myth. They illustrate how figures from antiquity can evolve into flexible cultural symbols, gaining new meanings while losing ties to original scholarship. Today, the Anunnaki continue to captivate imaginations worldwide, demonstrating that myth can be simultaneously historical, symbolic, and a canvas for contemporary narratives, depending on who tells the story and why. When evaluating historical claims about ancient civilizations, sky beings, or the Anunnaki, it is essential to define clear standards of evidence. Archaeology, textual sources, and corroboration are the pillars that allow scholars to separate speculation from verifiable history. Material evidence such as inscriptions, artifacts, architectural remains, and environmental data provides direct insight into past societies. Archaeologists study these remains carefully, documenting context, dating layers, and cross-referencing with other sites to ensure that conclusions are grounded in observable reality rather than imagination. Textual sources are equally important. In Mesopotamia, Sumerian and Akkadian cuneiform tablets preserve creation myths, administrative records, and legal codes. These texts must be read in the original language whenever possible, considering historical, linguistic, and cultural context. Translators and scholars compare tablets from different regions and periods to identify consistency and variation, allowing them to reconstruct how stories and beliefs evolved over time. Oral traditions can supplement written records, but require careful interpretation to avoid introducing modern biases or misreading symbolism as literal fact. Corroboration across disciplines strengthens historical claims. If a myth suggests a particular astronomical observation, it should align with what can be calculated about celestial events at the time. If a text refers to construction of a temple or ziggurat, archaeological remains should confirm the scale, materials, and timing. Environmental and geological data can also verify claims, such as flood layers corresponding to narratives of deluge. Independent confirmation from multiple sources is critical. A claim is weak if it relies on a single, unverified account. Historians emphasize that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Assertions that the Anunnaki or other deities were extraterrestrials would need clear, reproducible material proof, such as technological artifacts inconsistent with human capabilities of the time, reliably dated and contextually verified. Likewise, claims of secret knowledge encoded in ancient texts must be traceable, with documented translation processes and peer-reviewed scholarly support. The absence of such evidence does not necessarily disprove myths, but it limits their use as factual accounts. Understanding the standards of historical evidence also clarifies the difference between symbolic and literal interpretation. Ancient societies frequently described cosmic beings, divine instruction, or extraordinary events in metaphorical terms. Recognizing symbolism does not diminish the value of the texts. It helps situate them within cultural, moral, and social frameworks. Scholars can study these narratives for insight into worldview, law, and ethics without conflating metaphor with factual history. In short, evidence that supports historical claims must be material, textual, and corroborated. Archaeological remains, contemporaneous texts, and independent verification across disciplines are essential to establish credibility. Understanding the rigorous standards of evidence allows us to separate human imagination, symbolic narrative, and modern reinterpretation from what is demonstrably true about the past. Careful evaluation ensures that our knowledge of ancient civilizations, their beliefs, and their interaction with the cosmos remains grounded, reliable, and meaningful. Across Mesopotamia, from the Sumerians through the Akkadians and Babylonians, reverence for the sky was a central aspect of religion and social organization. Celestial bodies weren't considered extraterrestrial visitors, but were integrated into cosmology, ritual, and governance. The Anunnaki and other deities functioned as symbolic authorities, embodying moral order, justice, and the regulation of human life. Temples and ziggurats were constructed as physical and spiritual links between the heavens and the earth, allowing communities to perform ceremonies aligned with astronomical observation. These structures reflect both the technical skill and the cultural importance of connecting society with celestial cycles. Textual evidence from cuneiform tablets dating back to at least 2900 BCE shows that Mesopotamian myths systematically described the creation of the world, the establishment of laws, and the organization of society under divine authority. The Anunnaki appear as part of these narratives, participating in councils, delivering decrees, and managing cosmic and earthly order. Administrative and legal texts also emphasize that celestial observation was tied to civic planning, agriculture, and festival timing. These records provide a reliable framework for understanding how Mesopotamians conceptualized the relationship between humans and the heavens. Archaeology reinforces this picture. Ziggurats, temples, and observatories were precisely oriented with respect to stars, solstices, and lunar cycles. Artifacts such as star charts, cylinder seals, and ritual objects demonstrate systematic recording of celestial events. These findings show that sky reverence was practical as well as symbolic. Observation of the heavens guided planting, harvesting, and civic rituals, ensuring that communities could maintain survival and social stability. The evidence confirms that these practices were intentional, repeatable, and grounded in careful empirical observation. Across centuries, Mesopotamian traditions evolved but maintained the same foundational principle. Humans were accountable to cosmic and moral order as expressed through the gods. Myths about creation, divine councils, and celestial authority reinforced social norms, ethical behavior, and hierarchical structures. Rulers, priests, and scribes were entrusted with knowledge and responsibility, making the connection between human governance and divine oversight explicit. This connection legitimized leadership and provided a shared framework for ethical and ritual life. Modern reinterpretations of these myths often exaggerate or distort the role of the Anunnaki, turning symbolic deities into literal extraterrestrials or secret manipulators of human history. However, careful study of primary texts, archaeological context, and comparative analysis demonstrates that there is no historical evidence for such claims. The Mesopotamian worldview was sophisticated, relying on observation, ritual, and metaphor to structure society, not on contact with other worlds. We can confidently say that ancient Mesopotamians held the sky in deep reverence, integrated celestial cycles into governance and ritual, and created myths that reinforced social, moral, and cosmic order. The Anunnaki were symbolic participants in this system, representing authority, judgment, and continuity, rather than beings from another planet. Understanding these grounded facts allows us to appreciate the intellectual and cultural achievements of Mesopotamia while distinguishing history from speculation. The sky was a guide, a teacher, and a moral compass, not a secret code from extraterrestrial visitors. Across human history, we find remarkable parallels in how different cultures relate to the sky. From Mesopotamia to Mesoamerica, the Andes, Polynesia, Australia, and Africa, myths speak of beings descending from the heavens, imparting knowledge, guiding society, and teaching law and ritual. Mountains, temples, and sacred sites are consistently portrayed as points of contact between humans and the divine. Calendars, astronomical observation, and cyclical festivals connect daily life to celestial rhythms. These echoes are compelling, showing that humans everywhere have looked to the sky to understand order, morality, and survival. Yet these parallels do not constitute proof of a single hidden event or intervention. Each culture developed independently, responding to local environmental, social, and technological circumstances. The Sumerians recorded the Anunnaki and celestial councils within cuneiform tablets dating back to 2900 BCE, while Mesoamerican civilizations observed Venus and solar cycles to regulate planting and ritual centuries later. Polynesian navigators relied on stars for precise maritime travel over thousands of miles, and Aboriginal Australians encoded law, memory, and ethics in constellations. Each case reflects practical needs and cultural imagination rather than evidence of extraterrestrial visitation. Archaeology, textual study, and astronomy reinforce that these motifs emerge from human ingenuity, observation, and social necessity. Ziggurats, pyramids, temples, and ceremonial platforms align with celestial events because accurate timing was crucial for agriculture, ritual, and governance. Oral traditions and mythic narratives encode memory, ethical frameworks, and cosmology, ensuring that knowledge persists across generations. The repetition of motifs, celestial teachers, sky marriages, floods, cosmic judgment, is a product of universal human concerns, rather than a single historical episode. Modern reinterpretations often conflate these echoes into unified theories of alien contact or secret manipulation, but careful study shows that each tradition is context-specific. The Anunnaki, sun children, sky ancestors, and star navigators are symbolic, embedded in moral, social, and environmental frameworks. They reflect human attempts to explain the world, structure society, and connect lived experience with the larger cosmos. These echoes are meaningful as patterns of human cognition and culture, but they do not serve as empirical evidence for hidden historical events. Recognizing these patterns allows us to appreciate the shared human fascination with the sky, the search for guidance, and the desire to integrate ethical and social order into cosmology. Across continents and millennia, humans have consistently looked upward, creating stories that encode observation, morality, and communal responsibility. These parallels highlight creativity, adaptability, and cultural continuity rather than a literal chain of extraterrestrial influence. In conclusion, what we observe are echoes of human thought and societal organization, not proof of a single intervention or hidden event. The recurrence of motifs across time and space demonstrates common human concerns: survival, morality, leadership, and the search for meaning in the cosmos. By interpreting these echoes as reflections of human ingenuity and symbolic thinking, we honor the achievements of our ancestors without imposing modern narratives that lack historical evidence. These patterns are testimony to humanity's capacity to look at the stars, learn from them, and build civilizations informed by observation, ritual, and imagination.